Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Think, Engage, Thrive with me, your host, Phil Masiello. And as usual, we try and find really good entrepreneurs, somebody who's going to really have a great story and provide some insight and doing some unusual things that you don't see every day. We can get tired of listening to the people that talk about building a business on Amazon or e-commerce or SaaS products and things like that. So we've got, if you remember, a couple of a while ago, I can't remember exactly when, but we had a guy named Jim James on who was talking about the unnoticed entrepreneur and how to do things to get noticed. And one of his guests on his show was a gentleman named Jade Gray. And so Jade's with us tonight. He has a really wild background, went from New Zealand to China, and was working in northern China. We'll get the story from him, but I believe it was cattle farming for brands, for beef brands. And then he went and started some of his own businesses in China, a pizza business, a restaurant group in Beijing, and he's really focused on impact venture and social enterprise, which is really interesting. So he'll explain a bit about what he's done. So we'll bring him in and we'll talk to him about his background, what drove him, what got him started, and then what he's doing today and what he's done with corporate social responsibility, etc. So let's bring him in. Jade, thanks for being here all the way from New Zealand, right? It's morning for you.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. It is, but not too early. So you've treated me well. It's not a 5 o'clock start. Thank you.
That's great. That's great. So yeah, I did a bit of an intro for you. I worked off your background, but it's always better if you sort of explain what you did, how you got there, what you were doing, what got you to China, and all the things you did in China, because it seems like you were extremely busy in China. And I think we should start there.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I guess China has been a big part of my life, not just my working career. Having lived, behind border for 22 years. So obviously shaped me as a person, for better or worse. And I'm happy to share some of those learnings, I guess. People often ask, what took you to China, especially so young? Because I moved there, literally straight out of university.
Is that right?
And for me, it was very much a case of, I actually spent there's a thing called A-levels, which is I guess similar to your high school, last year of high school in the UK, and I got a scholarship. And I went over there playing rugby of all things. And I did my A-levels in the UK. And during that time, I got the typical question, what are you going to do when you leave, high school or university? And I was really set on international trade. And I was like, I want to leave New Zealand, go conquer the world and get amongst it. I want to come to the UK and Europe. And my economics teacher very bluntly said, the UK doesn't give a damn about New Zealand. You better go to Asia. So it was kind of a rude awakening that I realized. I did some research, and he was pretty true. UK had gone to EU and all that. And I started looking at the Asia piece, and if you looked at the numbers, that was our future, whether it's population growth, demand, engagement with tourism, politics. So I looked at the Asia piece, and China was kind of the big unknown. Japan was on a roll. This was early 90s. Korea was taking off, but everybody was talking about China and what was going to happen there. Was the sleeping dragon going to wake? So I just found it really exciting, the adventure side of it, more than maybe the commercial side.
Yeah.
So I jumped into language studies, learned Mandarin Chinese at university, studied marketing, and just tried to set myself up for a China play effectively. And so the 3-4 years at uni, graduated, and then I got a call from a friend who had just invested in a company in New Zealand that was a cattle stud farm, Angus cattle, so it's a breed of cattle. Right. And they were setting up a joint venture in China. They'd been approached by some Singaporean businessmen. It was funded by Silicon Valley money. There was a big opportunity for beef in China, which was called the millionaire's meat at the time. It was extremely expensive to eat beef in China.
Yeah.
Everybody was eating pork and chicken because of the conversion of obviously feed into protein, the cost of that. So there's a real opportunity for beef in China. And they had searched out this company in New Zealand. So they went up there, they tried to take some farmers up there and teach them Chinese and run the farm, but that was a complete disaster. They didn't learn Chinese too quick. So they flipped strategy and started looking for people that could speak Chinese and teach farming. And that's when they came across myself. I was desperate to get up there no matter what. And I did a 6-month crash course in animal husbandry in New Zealand at the farm with the cattle. And then we flew those about 300 Angus cattle, purebred cattle, on a 747 Megatop, truly cattle class, Phil. It was the first time I really flew cattle class. And we flew them up there. It was a wild ride. I can remember on the way up there with the cattle, getting a call up from the pilot saying, "Hey guys, there's some movement down in the hold. I think you guys should go down and have a look." So we're in that bubble of the old 747. We go down with the face masks on because there's so much ammonia down there, right? You could hardly breathe. And sure enough, one of the bulls had jumped out of the pan and he was just rummaging around the base of the 747, getting highly anxious. And those things could punch a hole straight through that wall, right? I mean, that's pretty thin, I think, aluminium or whatever that metal is. So we had to tranquilize him. We got to China, landed, took the cattle up to the farm, and really built the farm up there. And effectively, the guys, the Kiwi team, stayed for 2 weeks, got the cattle settled. They tapped out, and I was left by myself as the only foreigner on the farm to run the farm with about 20 Chinese employees and our Chinese joint venture partners, who are the local Chinese government, the Economic Development Bureau. Needless to say, I was a lamb to slaughter, Phil. Young guy, just in the depths of the back blocks of China, and this is the 90s. In those days, the ideas of a successful venture for the Chinese government was to pretty much just fleece as much money as you could out of the foreign partner, and that was a successful time. If you couldn't do it, you'd kind of failed. So that was a pretty rough experience. Highly educational. I'm still scarred from it, but I learned a lot. My language excelled. I learned a lot about Chinese culture, which was really crucial for my future ventures, and some of the model success I gained later was really due to that. So yeah, that was what got me there.
That's a tremendous story. Pretty unbelievable. Had you spoke Chinese before you went over?
Well, I had my degree, but again, degree Chinese was very much in the safety of a classroom. So no, it gave me a good foundation. But I really, when you're shoveling cattle shit with your team, you learn some pretty good Chinese pretty quick, and it was very, very much a baptism by fire. But I came out, I was literally last my class, I think, at uni in Chinese. I wasn't a natural, academic with the languages. But by the end of that year, I'm pretty sure I would have been the best in class. I'd nailed it. Yeah, I had to, right? There was nobody there to speak English to for 12 months. So,
yeah, you have no choice.
Yeah.
We were over there a couple of years ago for about a month and a half. My wife, and because one of my daughters was born in China, and it's a beautiful country. It's tremendous, but I would have never been able to make it through without a translator, because we just didn't, between all of us, we just didn't know enough to get through. But we had a guide and a translator, so it was great. I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
one of my best
it's
trips.
kind of cool. Like, you can't bluff it in China, and yeah, you really are intrepid. Outside of you got Shanghai and probably Shenzhen, where English is pretty commonly spoken. But outside of that, yeah, you're on your own.
Yeah. Well, we were out. We started in Beijing, but we were in the western part of China for quite some time. And
oh wow, even tougher. Yeah. Well, I speak Chinese, Phil, and some of the accent, the dialects out there, even I can't, make a go of it. So yeah, good luck if you don't.
Yeah, it was an experience, but it was lovely. It was one of my favorite trips that we've ever taken. So we still love it, and I love the food. So it was fantastic.
Right.
So you did that for a period of time then, right? And then you started doing some things on your own, or?
Well, it wasn't that, like life, it's never a straight line. And Actually, the venture, the cattle farm, the venture collapsed. The Chinese, the locals sucked all the money out of the business. Politics with directors and shareholders, and it was a complete train wreck. And so I tapped out of that after a year. I could see where it was heading. Went back to New Zealand, licked my wounds, swore I'd never go back to China. And then I got a call up about 6 months later from McDonald's, or actually OSI, Ottoman Sons International, which is a big meat processor out of Chicago. And they do a lot of McDonald's contracts globally. So they rang me up and said, look, we heard you're a crazy Kiwi that's willing to live out in the sticks. We've got a new feedlot we're building for McDonald's. Do you want to come over and run it? And I reluctantly did. I just felt, it was a legit organization. It wasn't a startup. It was McDonald's, and I was going to be looked after pretty well. So I thought I'd get back on the horse, which I did. And I remember pulling up, got into Beijing airport, got picked up by the CEO. And I remember in the car riding back to the way to the hotel, I was really excited, we wouldn't get stuck into it. And he said, Jade, what else can you do outside a cattle farm? And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, well, we decided last night to not go ahead with the feedlot. And I was just like, oh man, I just sold up everything in New Zealand. I was back in this place. It was just like, this is Groundhog Day, right? I couldn't believe it. And then, literally over that dinner, I explained my background a bit. I came from a family of grocers. I was a fourth generation grocer, supermarkets. Right. I had ran a lot of butchery, as a kid, worked in butcheries in my dad's supermarket. And I said, well, I can do, some things in supermarkets. He said, great, because we've got a contract with Costco running their butcheries through China. So why don't you run, and they're not going well, why don't you go in and sort them out? So they had I think about 4 or 5 butcheries through China and Costco's. It was like, okay, let's do it. So ran those butcheries. It was really interesting actually, because I went from the breeding, the genetics, feed, part of the business, and then I went into the meat processing / retail, butchery side of it. So I got a kind of a whole snapshot on the whole, the value chain. But that was wild. I mean, a butchery in China is not what you'd expect, in your hometown, Phil. I refer to it more like it's kind of like a bit of a zoo, and I mean that quite sincerely, because half of our SKUs, half our products are actually alive. They weren't dead, right? So we were selling turtles, snakes, peacocks, guinea fowl, frogs, you name it. And so we had to keep these things alive, right? Massive tanks of fish, exotic stingrays, and that was your typical Costco butchery, right?
Wow.
So I was running a zoo along with obviously the chiller with meat. And I can remember actually one night we couldn't find that. We went in one morning and the net had lifted off the snake tank, and all the snakes had got out into the supermarket.
Oh, geez.
And we were they weren't venomous, but pretty scary, big decent sized snakes. I can remember just that next probably week we'd hear a scream down an aisle, and everybody would rush down to aisle 5, and here would be another snake. And the next day you'd scream in the car park, and so we wrangled those. Stayed with them for a year, got into some abattoir work. I was kind of like a bit of a project manager for the CEO, just to sort out some issues in the business. And it was fascinating, time, but I was definitely over the corporate world. It wasn't my cup of tea at the end of the day, and I was desperate to do my own thing. So I jumped an opportunity when a friend rang me, a Chinese guy I actually met at the farm back in the farm days. And he'd picked up a fitness center, like a gym in Beijing. It almost sounded like in a game of mahjong. It felt really kind of dodgy the way he picked it up. But anyway, he rang me up and said, I've got no idea how to run a gym. I know you're into fitness. Do you want to come up and check it out? And I was like, at that point, I was doing the night shift in an abattoir in Kunming. And it was rough, man. Like a Chinese abattoir, is not pretty. Abattoirs in general aren't pretty. So I was desperate to get out of there. Jumped on the opportunity. And fortunately for me, it was based in the foreign language university in Beijing. There's about 20,000 foreign students there, and about 200,000 foreign students in that area. All right. So Beijing has the largest population of students in the world, of tertiary students.
Is that right?
56 universities in Beijing, would you believe
Wow.
it? And so we were dumped right in the middle of that, the 2 top universities, which is Beijing University and Tsinghua University. We were in between there. And we're at the foreign language university, which had all the foreign students. So I turned up from this abattoir in Kunming, the only foreigner, to this mecca of like, I was 24, 25. There's all these girls from Hawaii and Norway and like cruising around the gym and like exercise. It was like, I was, it was pretty much a sure bet once I got there that I was staying. So I stayed there, invested in the gym, and we turned that around. It was, struggling, had like 75 members when we took it on. We got it up to about 1,500 members in about, I'd say the next 12 months, and really made a go of it. And we were humming. You gotta remember, this is kind of pre-Olympics 2001. China is just on a rocket ship. They just landed the rights to the Olympic Games. And it was the wild, the wild East, and I mentioned it's like California in the probably 1800s, it was just anything was on and you just go for it. And the government was encouraging it, it was coming out, internationalism, really encouraging foreign direct investment. They wanted to suck out as much, investment and IP out of the West as they could. And not in a negative way, just they wanted to play catch up, right?
Right.
So it was like watching Rome get built in a day, and 10 years, front row seat.
That's fantastic. That's a great story. It's a great adventure, eh?
Oh, it is. And
I would imagine that you were single at the time.
I was Phil. Yes. Yeah. Stayed that way for quite a while. But it was amazing. And adventure is a good word, and I've always leaned into adventure more than probably opportunity. To me, life is about, collecting experiences, not wealth. And I've I think, stuck to that ethos to date. It was an amazing adventure. And as I mentioned, that kind of pre-Olympic, I've never seen anything like it. Beijing, literally the night they announced it, there was a massive party in Beijing. I can remember it vividly. And then the next morning, all you heard was just jackhammers. They was knocking stuff down. They were ready for it, right? It was all on. And for the next 7 years, you're living in the world's biggest building site. I mean, you would have seen the buildings from the Bird's Nest to the Ice Cube to the Opera Center. I mean, they just built some of the great architectural buildings of the modern time in those kind of 7 years. And that went right up until the closing ceremony, it was a trip. It was a roller coaster, a white knuckle roller coaster, which you just had on for dear life. But there was no lack of opportunity, and there was very few barriers in your way. As long as you weren't getting into sensitive areas like media or cultural stuff, you were safe. And a couple of times you cross the line and you get a rap over the knuckles and you go back to your safe space. But,
Is that right?
Yeah, dealing with communist China. And I think that's, people need to be aware. You can't judge China on their political system, right? You got to judge it on the 10,000 years of fabulous culture,
right?
And food and people and just innovation. And that's how I view China. And they're currently under a regime, which I personally agree with. But that's not always the choice of the people, right?
Yeah. Was it? I guess it was. Was it difficult or easy to navigate that? I guess the political side of it, right? Or did it affect you? I guess if you stay sort of out of it, it doesn't affect you. I don't.
No, you get dragged into it. You can't be there for any meaningful period of time without getting dragged into it. It affects every part of your life, from the size of your dog to kind of what color car you can drive, literally. Absolutely. So every part of your life comes into contact with the Communist Party, just on different levels of engagement, and at different times. It comes in waves. Talk about the dog thing. So dogs were banned in China over a certain height because the dog, it's bitten a child. Central top-down policy, right? Any dog over 30 centimeters at the shoulder is banned. That policy gets enacted, but then they don't necessarily, after 6 months, people stop following it up. There's corruption. You start paying for a permit for a bigger dog, and that goes on for another 3 or 4 years. You'd never know, and then one day another kid gets bit, and then that policy suddenly gets enacted, and they'll just take away your dog and destroy it. If you get caught walking down the street, so you're constantly navigating this kind of undulating policy. It was, you just had to kind of have your wits about you, be kind of plugged in what was the mood at the time over certain things. You're always coming into contact. I mean, we had about, I think it was close to 20 bureaus would manage so after the gym, or actually during the gym, the same, you'd be in contact with about 20 bureaus, which would engage you on anywhere from a daily to kind of, let's say, annual basis. And each of them had a mandate. Each of them were generally, at that point in time, were looking for a kickback. And, you had to just navigate that, right? And that was probably the toughest part of my time there, Phil. I came from New Zealand. If you look at our government transparency ratings, we're always number 1 or number 2 with Norway. It's just it's a very clean, kind of system and relative to other systems. So New Zealand's, plays it straight down the middle. Yeah. And that was tough in China, because if you played it straight in the middle, you would just go out of business. They would shut you down because they relied on kickbacks to top up their very meager salaries, right? So once you got through that initial cringe of it and how to do it where it was legal, and that was the weird thing, there were legal ways to do kickbacks, and that was what you had to work out, right? And that was the art of it, is how you don't expose yourself. You play the game, but you're not doing illegal stuff where you can be then exposed and shut down and going against your moral compass as well, right? So you had to play the game. If you didn't like the game, nobody was forcing you to be in China. And that's, right. Tell people who complain, oh, it's terrible. It's like, yeah, it is, but you don't have to be here. You can get on a plane and go home and but stay there, because the adventure and the opportunity. So that was probably the toughest thing. And it probably took me 10 years to feel okay with it, and okay, I mean, knowing how to do it in a way that I didn't feel as morally, corrupt, being compromised. That was probably the biggest thing that got to me in China.
Yeah, it's the only experience I had with that type of environment was in Washington, D.C., actually. I was building retail stores, and the system it was so bad that brands like Staples, which is an office supply superstore in the United States, and Papa John's Pizza, which is a franchise, refused to build stores in Washington, D.C. because the only way that you could get your store built, I mean, it was worse than New York City. The only way you could get your store built was to be able to pay off contractors and government officials to get your permits and things like that. It was a terrible time, and that's the only time I got involved. And for us, I didn't want to do it. And so I happened to have a store. We already had 2 operating stores, and I had the store where this person who was on the city council, who was running for mayor, he was involved, and we became friends because he was in the store all the time. And I explained to him the problem that we were having with this one store we were building. And he turned us into the poster child of what was wrong with the city. And we were on the news and we were in all these places. And all of a sudden we started getting permits and getting everything without paying for anything. But, all of a sudden, once the stores got open, we were getting parking tickets for every single thing we did. And
payback.
Yeah, it was a bit ridiculous. But that's the only time that I had that I in my business career that I had to face that type of thing. I'm sure it's even worse in China, but to me it was fundamentally a problem with business. But in China it's done for different reasons, right? And here it was done for pure greed. Those people were making enough money to survive. They didn't need to. But I would imagine in China everybody's trying to supplement their income to get a little bit more.
Yeah, and absolutely. Not everyone. There's plenty that were making way more than they should have been, but they just keep taking more. But I hear you, and that's kind of the unwritten rule. Well, at least before Xi Jinping was this. We pay low wages, and you're going to clip the ticket from the private sector, which is like another form of tax, and it just goes straight to you, and it saves bureaucracy. And it's kind of these unwritten murky rules, right? But what I had 2 kind of these stories which I always found fascinating, which kind of showed both sides of the equation. And I think, for your viewers who aren't even in China, this is kind of anywhere in the developing world, anywhere, if you look at the corrupt rankings, probably anywhere from 50 below is going to have these kind of dynamics, right? And I remember in terms of that legal corruption, the Fire Bureau was extremely powerful in China. They're the only bureau that could actually shut you down on the spot, right? And it was run by the military. And they held that power because it was great way to get revenue into the leaders of the military. And they'd come in once a year, just before Chinese New Year, which is the Christmas of the West, looking to top up so they could go and buy gifts to their family. And they'd come in and they'd do this big check on your place, and they'd always find 20, 30 things why you were shouldn't be operating as a fire hazard. And so they'd come with this checklist, very grim faces, big like hats on, and they look like 5-star generals, and 5 of them will walk through with clipboards, and it's quite intimidating when you first see it. And anyway, they'll give you this notice and say, we're going to shut you down. You've all this, and you're just kind of freaking out a bit because okay, we're going to be shut down. How do we navigate this? And then 3 or 4 days later, you'll start to invite them for a cup of tea, and you'll chat, and you'll work it out. What are some ways we could maybe pay penance? And is there fines we could pay? And then, long story short, with these guys this time, we said, yes, well, you clearly don't understand the fire regulations. We request that you purchase a detailed volume of the fire regulations, go away and study it, and that will be your punishment. And then you can reopen. We're like, okay, great. So they bring in this like 10 volume of like the encyclopedias of their rules. They drop it off, and they send the invoice. The invoice is for about $10,000, right? So you send it, you can invoice for it. You get a receipt. You can put it through your accounts. There's a legal purchase. We purchased these very expensive books, and they get the 10,000, and who knows where that goes. So that's the legal. You know what I mean? There's that legal way of playing the system. On the flip side, you play it straight in the middle, which we did with our tax. And we got called into the tax bureau one day, and they're like, there's about 100 people in the room, and they said, we've received your tax returns. We're not happy with them. You've clearly been corrupt. You're not declaring everything. And we're going to audit you, right? This is the big room, big announcement. So we're okay. We knew it was completely clean and no problem, no sweat. They come in, about 4 accountants next week, sit with their accountants for about 4 or 5 days. And by about day 3, they call us in. And not me, they'd never say it direct to the foreigner, but they'd say to my 2IC, who was Chinese, we've got a problem. And I was like, then she'd be like, what's the problem? And she goes, well, we can't find anything that's wrong.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, why is it a problem? Isn't that good? Oh, no, terrible. Like, why is it terrible? Well, because our superior has given us a target of how much tax to recoup from you 100 companies. And if we don't come back with something from you, they're going to believe you've paid us off even more than what you're paying him off. And we're going to be in trouble, and it's like, so you'd played it clean because there's nothing to give. Now that's even a bigger problem, right? If we'd like found something, paid $1 million, everyone's happy, no problem, thank you, bye, right? It's like, well, we've done, what are we going to do? Like, we had to literally create a situation where we've done something illegal. One of our dormitories, which we used to house our employees, one of our dormitories, I think, wasn't the right zone or something. And so we said, look, well, can we use this? We've done something wrong here. Like, oh yeah, great. So they gave us a fine on that. We had to pay a tax on that fine. And then went back to the superior and we wrote it all. It was all fine. Right? So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Anyway, you play the game. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. When we were over there, we met when we were in Beijing, we met in the, I forget the name of the area. It's on the other side of the Forbidden City, and it's old dwellings. There's a name for it. I can't remember.
Oh, the Hutongs.
The Hutongs. Yeah. And there was a person there who was an artist, and he was completely supported by the government. That was his job, to create, I guess, art for the government. And he had one of these houses, and that's where he lived, and they paid him a salary, and he was perfectly happy doing it. It was just his way of life. So, and he'd been doing it for about 30 years. I would imagine creating propaganda posters and things like that, but I don't know what he was creating. But
yeah, well, it's a different way. Rather than in New Zealand, you have a welfare state and you give people welfare payments, where over there they just give you a job, even if it's painting, doing propaganda art, or picking up litter and putting it in the bin next to the, everybody's got a job is kind of the theory, right?
Yeah.
But I think on that, the big takeaway for me was, at a very young age, you just learn to be highly adaptable, right? You just got to think on your feet every day. You're getting some random, just some random situation. And I think it really bode me well for future venture, Phil, in terms of that agility, just not getting caught up in what you think is right or how it should be done, or this is the plan I've got. You just had to be constantly evolving to survive. And so I have noticed coming back to New Zealand, I'm definitely more adaptable than probably a lot of my counterparts, just because I had 20 years of what I call the school of education by the Communist China, the Communist Chinese Party. They taught me some great traits: resilience, grit, how to smile in the face of chaos, all these things, so grateful for that time. But yeah, in the current climate, glad not to be there, and pretty happy back in New Zealand.
Yeah. So then you went back to New Zealand, and then what are you doing? What's Off-Piste?
Yeah, Off-Piste. So Off-Piste, for those that aren't skiers in the world, piste is a French term for the trail, the ski trail. Off-Piste meaning going into the powder and the fun stuff, which is where I like to go, off the beaten trail. So Off-Piste actually came from my last venture in China. So after the gyms I mentioned, I got into food and beverage, into restaurants and cafes, and ended up in kind of pizza of all places, and did a pizza delivery chain in China, which we franchised. And that was a really fun venture called Gung Ho Pizza. And on the back of that, talking about that kind of impact, and obviously in China there's a lot of space for social enterprise and impact, given that they were moving from a developing nation to a developed nation. So there's lots of opportunity for impact. And we actually went on a journey of getting B Corp certified. And for some of your audience may know what the B Corp certification is, but it's effectively the world's most robust, sustainable, kind of accreditation for business. And so we were the first B Corp in China in food and beverage. And we were on a very tough task to get that accreditation. But on that journey, I realized the value of the importance of the supply chain on your greenhouse gas emissions and your impact effectively on resource, water, land, air. So during that process, I came across the impacts of animal agriculture as well on that, and just how they're exponentially larger than plant-based foods. So that was a real insight. And when I came back to New Zealand, I looked at the impact space I could play in here, and realized that New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions are quite unique. So the majority of our emissions come from agriculture, where most countries it comes from energy or transport, right? But New Zealand has 95% green energy through our hydro scheme, and a very small population with transport. So agriculture is our big export globally, primarily meat and dairy. And I realized that, if we're going to move the dial in New Zealand around greenhouse gas, it needs to be in agriculture, and in particular cattle, because cattle have the vast majority of those emissions, mainly through nitrous oxide and methane gas. So that kind of set me on a path, and I was like full circle, because I come out of the meat sector. I knew that business well. And then the plant-based space, which we pushed at our pizza chain to get accreditations, I thought, hey, let's give it a push here in New Zealand and really try to bring that insight to New Zealand and set New Zealand up for, I guess, the next generation of protein, which is going to be, in my opinion, non-animal, whether that's plant or fungi or whatever that other stream is. So got stuck into plant-based meats, and have been involved in that space. A venture, Off-Piste Provisions, we develop plant-based meats and plant-based nutrition, which is, I guess, pretty world leading in regards to, we have a very clean label. And when I mean clean, I'm talking about there's no artificial ingredients or flavors or processing aids or any nitrates or hidden things in there which make the process easy, like even gluten-free, we're GMO-free. And so we've really made a position globally as a leading brand for clean label plant-based meats. And we also just play in the ambient, so shelf-stable space, Phil. So not in the freezer, not in the chiller. Our products are shelf-stable. So think of in the supermarket aisles. So we do jerky, we do pork rinds, Slim Jims, these kind of products, snacks and meat snacks, but plant-based versions, right?
Yeah. I had a friend who was trying to make mushroom jerky,
Yeah.
but it just wasn't. It just didn't. I don't think he understood the process very well, because it just was. It just didn't. The texture. I mean, the texture never came off good, and it just felt like crumbly mushrooms, And he kept working on it, but he wasn't that scientific. He just knew he wanted to do something plant-based. He started with mushroom jerky because he was in the mushroom business, and he got a freeze drying machine and things, or a drying machine.
Yeah.
And but he just could never get it done. He was trying for years. So
Yeah, right. No, there's been a few, and there's a couple of brands that are doing very well in that space. But the challenge with the mushroom piece is it's not really a protein alternative. There's only about 3% protein in those. By the time you've dehydrated it, where if you go down the plant-based line, which we do, we're about 46% protein. So it really does offset your protein if you're moving to a plant-based diet, which is probably the real value add.
So you're selling to supermarkets, I would imagine, supermarkets, club stores, and such.
Yeah, we are. So we launched in New Zealand. We did about a year of R&D with New Zealand's top food technology university and sports university, and developed the formulation. That was 2020, 2021. And then we launched in 2022 into New Zealand. And we've just been pushing hard. We got into all the major chains in New Zealand with supermarkets, kind of specialty health foods, also gas, gone to all the convenience petrol stations. So we pretty much tapped New Zealand out, but what we realized is that New Zealand really wasn't ready for what we had. It was still too niche. We couldn't get cut through in mainstream. We could get cut through in the niche, those specialty stores, vegan stores, outdoor stores. We couldn't get cut through in the main supermarkets. Not all of our SKUs, some have, but not the full range. And then we realized pretty quick that there are parts of the US where that is mainstream now. And in particular, we've set up shop up in the US, which is in the Pacific Northwest. So from kind of Seattle down to, I guess, San Fran is pretty. It's mainstream. It's no longer a fringe offering, and there's decent population up there, pretty affluent. And we've made our adopted home up in Oregon, up in a place called Bend, which is an amazing town, city in Oregon. So we've been up in market there for about we launched there last month. We've been in the US for a year on Amazon with D2C with Shopify, and just trying to push into that market. So now we're in New Zealand, Australia, and the US. So
it's fantastic. I didn't realize you were in the US. Yeah, it's a bit more mainstream here. It's a bit more. There's supermarkets with actual have actually cut it into the regular products. So you've got choices. There's a lot in the frozen food section. There's a lot in the refrigerated section.
Yeah, correct.
And the
snacks. I noticed when I was in a cafe in Portland, and if you don't ask for milk in your coffee, they give you oat milk. Right? Yeah. That's the default, which was for me quite mind blowing, and that seemed to be at a lot of cafes in Portland. So and I appreciate it's a niche in the States, but we've got faith that whilst the sector, the plant-based meat sector is going through pretty headwinds right now, the whole movement towards more plants in your diet certainly aren't, and if anything, it's accelerating. So we just need to get that offering better positioned, better priced, cleaner, more transparency around how we're doing it. And I think there'll be a second wave that should really hit the mark, and we plan to be part of that second wave.
Well, I think it's going to continue to grow. I mean, it's a big category, and there's a tremendous amount of people. I mean, just in my household, we have two vegans out of 5 kids. 2 of them are vegans, and the other 3 are not big meat eaters. They're not vegan, but they're not quite vegetarian, but they're on the way. So I think there's a lot of the trend towards, especially with this generation of whether it's Gen Z or
Alpha,
Gen Z Alpha. They're more focused on not just veganism, but the impact of what you were talking about, the impact of farming, whether it's cows or whether it's, just regular farming, the impact on the environment. My daughter gets mad at me for taking care of the lawn because I use fertilizers, and she doesn't like it. She doesn't like it. I get yelled at for that. I get yelled at for bottled water. I get yelled at for all kinds of things. So.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real awareness, and with social media or the movement, with likes of Greta Thunberg, or there's been a real awareness in that generation, and they're inheriting that planet, and they're like, look, if you guys aren't going to deal with it, we will.
Yeah. So you have a team in Bend, Oregon?
Yeah, we're just setting up. So I'm traveling up there a bit. Actually moving my family up there for 6 weeks to get into the trenches, which will be fun. But we've got a what we call a community manager about to be placed up there, who's boots on the ground, local, knows the network, just to build the brand. And we've actually got our head of marketing, who's currently based down in SoCal, was actually moving up there with his family, which is exciting. So yeah, we're going to put some roots down there. There's good cultural alignment with New Zealand, great outdoors scene, which is obviously, for Off-Piste Provisions, our core market are people out hiking and biking and rafting, and they need lightweight, dehydrated snacks and foods. So that's right in our kind of our sweet spot. And just it's ease of business as well. It's a direct flight to San Fran from Auckland, jump on another plane to Bend, an hour and a half. I can be door to door in about 16 hours. So time zone's great. There's 4-hour time zone difference for calls, and it works a treat. So we're really excited about that. And I'm just excited to, on a personal level, I obviously spent so much time in China, and I saw the whole Eastern way of doing things, and not just business, we're talking life, right? From what you eat, to your diet, to the way you engage your family, you name it. I'm really fascinated to see probably the flip side of that, which is, the other superpower on to kind of balance the globe, which is the US, and kind of leading the Western charge, and to see how the US is, because I'm pretty naive with the US, and I've been there a ton of times visiting on holidays, but never actually deeper into it. So I'm really excited to, just as a life experience, to get I think a real, probably a 360 view on the world. So I find that stimulating.
Yeah, it's a great part of the country. It's a great part of the country, and it's a great way of life. I have a friend who, when we were building skincare brands on Amazon, we had a manufacturer who's a friend of mine, and he's built a great team. He's got a beautiful facility, and he's had it for decades, and he decided that he just didn't want to live. It was in New Mexico. He didn't want to live there anymore. So he packed up and moved his family out to Oregon, and he's been there for the last 10 years. He runs his business, but he does it from there, and he's got a great team that are running his facility. So, and he just loves it. And I have another friend who we were helping build his brand on Amazon and online as well, on e-commerce. And he just, after he sold, he moved to Bellingham, Washington, which is a little further up towards the Canadian border. He loves it.
Great ski town.
So it's I know a lot of people who move out there. I like it. I like the West Coast. My daughter goes to university in UCLA, and and I've spent a lot of time on the West Coast, spent a lot of time in San Francisco. But at the end of the day, for me, I'm more of an East Coast person in that lifestyle. I was born and raised in New York City, and that's sort of it. I live in Maryland and close to DC, and it's just that kind of vibe.
You need that hustle, Phil. You need that hustle.
I love going there for vacations. I like going to Italy for vacations. It's a slower pace, but I don't think I could live there full time.
No, I get it. No, we look forward to getting right across the US. I mean, kind of putting a beachhead down in Bend, but there's other places, even the East Coast, that would totally work for our brand. You got Vermont. Actually, surprisingly, one of our biggest markets is Florida. So there's definitely other parts of the US we're going to head up. But what I love about what I've seen in Bend, which is kind of cool for a startup coming in, you've got this really laid back, very, and it's definitely developing fast. But that's on the back of the whole Bay Area. During COVID, a lot of people realized they could work remotely. They've
Sure.
tapped out San Fran. They've moved up to Bend. They can travel down there, commute if they have to. So it's a very innovative. There's a lot of smart, Bay people, money there that are just hustling innovation. There's Cultivate Bend. You've got the Works, all these kind of outdoor innovation kind of brands going off there. So no shortage. I'm definitely not in a sleepy town. It's hustling. It's cool.
Yeah. It's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
The East Coast has a tremendous amount of opportunity in that world, especially in the supermarket business with places like Wegmans and those type of supermarkets that are more progressive and have that type of client base.
Totally.
And Whole Foods is really dominant Whole Foods is dominant across the country, but really on the East Coast is I think more of a stronghold.
And actually, one thing we've been surprised at is because we're currently fundraising for our US expansion. And just in Bend alone, the Angel Network there, guys that work in VCs that commute down, from Bend. So that was a bit of an kind of an unexpected bonus when we put roots down. And suddenly, we talked about our fundraise, and people are like, oh yeah, you got to speak to such and such or this angel group, so it's definitely ticking some great boxes for us right now. Yeah,
well, it's a great category. I mean, there's a lot of money flowing into that category because everybody sees the growth, so it shouldn't be difficult to raise capital. So we're pretty much at the end of time. So why don't we talk about closing it up? I put your information in the description of the show, so I'll have your website and for Off-Piste and anything else you want in there. But how can people get in touch with you? Just go to the website if they're interested in your products. Are they available in the US right now, or?
Absolutely. So to get the product, offpisteprovisions.com is our website. We've got a store there that you can get delivered anywhere in the US. We're also on Amazon, and then retail right now just on the in Oregon. We're going to roll that out. But then socials, jump on our Instagram, Facebook. You'll be able to follow new launches and things we're up to and where we're launching next. So we've got a pretty fun Instagram account, outdoors, if you're into the adventure and you want to get an adventure fix during your mundane day, come and follow us.
Yeah, that'd be great. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you taking the time to do it, especially since you're in a different time zone and a different part of the world. But sounds like you're going to be in the US a lot more. So,
absolutely. No, thanks, Phil, and great having these types of shows for, just sharing. Right, we're all in the hustle together. We're all battling it out, and it's great to support each other in the entrepreneurial, in the world.
Yeah, I love it, and we're pretty much at the end, and I wish you good luck, and I hope we stay in touch. I'd love to keep in touch and see how you're progressing. I think it's great, and obviously more and more of that product is just going to start flowing through all the channels. I mean, again, we shop at Wegmans, which is a big supermarket chain in the Northeast, and they've just integrated it all into the mainstream products at this point because it's so readily available, whether it's in the refrigerated section, the freezer sections, or the dry sections. So it's great.
No, exciting time, and just keep those the next generations coming through. That demand will keep moving, and we'll be just fine.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come on, and we'll close it on up, folks. I appreciate you sticking with us. We're always bringing you interesting entrepreneurs, people with great stories, and this was another example of that. So we'll see you next week.